think the tenor of the conversation today, there's a number of different ways that the government interacts with the technology sector. The technology industry engages with government in a few different ways. I think, Pablo's role at Salesforce in the public policy space is one. So how does the government engage with companies from a regulatory standpoint, and how does a company interact with the government from a policy perspective? Obviously, there's other ways. Companies sell quite a bit to the federal government, and Salesforce actually does that as well, which is going to be an interesting part of this conversation. And I'd say the last piece is the government is a big generator of data and also opportunity for companies. And so I know there are a lot of companies that kind of work in between their customers and the government in order to provide a service or provide data. And we can touch on some of that as well. But just to start, Pablo, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about your role. What role does public policy play at Salesforce? How did you get to this point? Some of the experiences that you had at the State Department, how does that play into the way that you all go about your day-to-day on the public policy team there?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for being here. I mean, this is really exciting. And I've had a chance to have some conversations with a few of you. It's a fantastic group and network. So we'll do everything we can to help nurture it over coming months. To answer your question, Andrew, the public policy team at Salesforce itself is a very small, diverse, global, but incredible team. So we have 3 people in Brussels, 4 people in Washington, 3 people here, 1 in Australia, one in New Delhi. Actually, the former Uber head of public policy left Uber and joined us. And so we do a lot with very little. And part of what we're trying to do, if I had to, can you guys hear me okay? I can hear my voice go up and down. Part of what we're trying to do, and this is how I talk about my role internally at the company as well, is we're trying to do one thing among others. Or among many others, but the most important thing is we're trying to build a trusted relationship with government. And for me, that means doing it with the Indian government at the federal, state, and local level. And I can give you a couple of examples of how we've done that successfully. We do that in Australia, we do that in Singapore, and we do that in Japan. And the reason I picked those countries, and I could go into the Brazilian example, though that's a very sort of toxic a political environment at the federal level right now, so I'll stick to the other areas. But the reason that's important, and the reason I explained and mentioned these 4 countries, is because we're traditionally a B2B a company, and so we're selling to large enterprises to get them to be smarter so that they can serve their respective customers in a better way, whether that's a hospital or whether that's a government, or whether that's a bank or some sort of other financial institution or a nonprofit. And so it's those markets in Asia that are Salesforce's focus right now, the newest of which is India. And so we've done a lot of work around, for instance, the Global Entrepreneurship Summit late last fall, which was an initiative started in the Obama administration and yet sponsored by this White House, as well as by Niti Aayog next to the Prime Minister's office. We now have, I think, 1,000 employees who work out of Hyderabad, building core Salesforce product in the same way that we build Salesforce product just down the street at One Market, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll leave it at that point. I'll add one more point before I turn it over, and that is I started in government, and part of the reason I love this particular role is that I've sort of sat on both sides of the aisle.
Sorry, it's a little confusing. I might speak up because it's also confusing to me as I try to organize my own thoughts. But what's been so fascinating for me is to have actually come from government. So now that I'm trying to build up a relationship, a trusted relationship with government, to talk about digital transformation, to point to examples started during the Obama administration, like 18F and others, it's really fascinating to be able to really speak from experience, because I was, sort of a foreign service officer, a U.S. diplomat, dealing with the best and the worst technology that the State Department had to offer. And so I've got great examples of how, we had very few tools to serve American diplomacy really well. Things are changing, fortunately, and I think one area that's shared between the previous and this administration, and there aren't too many areas, but one of them is this idea of digital transformation and of investing in technology in the federal government.
So to that point, the Salesforce, I think most people probably know it as a customer relationship management tool, and it enables, if you drive around any part of San Francisco and see the billboards that you guys run, it's Salesforce enables X company to better serve its customers. Talk about how that works, not just at the federal level, but maybe state and local. I know, from my time in government, a lot of folks would say, well, the government really doesn't have customers. The government's unique and doesn't need, B2B type tools like that. But you all do have a very, very strong presence at the federal level, and I know state and local as well. What does that look like? How are you enabling government to act a bit more like a business when it comes to customer service? And how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that question. And one of the things that I've sort of witnessed over the last, I've been at Salesforce for 6 years, which is a lifetime. So I got to Salesforce when none of this existed, when there were 6,000 employees, and we're now 30. So I've really seen the progression, not only in size and employee base, and also in sort of product offerings and sophistication of the technology, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the trends that I've seen is that a lot of the innovation from a digital transformation in government really is being generated at the state level. And that's why we've done so well, because there was a great demand early on for doing things better in a place, whether it's at a city level, where customers are saying, hey, mayor, there's a problem in this whole highway or street or graffiti or whatever it is. And where there is a very active and vociferous constituency and is knocking at your door. And slowly, I've also seen that grow to the federal level. What's interesting, though, is that it's not just happening in the United States. And we've paid attention and done quite well elsewhere as well. Another great example of a place where at the local level, they've been very smart about smart cities, about digital government, about creating one-stop shops for the delivery of government services is Australia. And so, for instance, our largest customer in all of Asia Pacific now is actually a state government, and that is the New South Wales government. And the way we think about it, you're right. I don't think the government will ever and should ever just act like a business. However, there's a principle from business that you can really adopt into government that will improve just about everything. And that is keeping the customer, and in this case, the constituent, the citizen, at the heart of everything you do. And I think we can all agree that that's important because we're both all citizens and possibly all business people and possibly also employees of government. I don't know. So that's how we view it. And so everything that we design, the use cases that we try to support in government, whether it's at the city, state, or even federal level, are all done around this idea of sort of customer centricity, like citizen-centric government of like this new era.
So kind of looping back to the policy question, in the governments that you've seen do this well and some of the governments that need to make progress, in order for the government to be more customer-centric and really start walking down the path of digital transformation, what are some of the policy changes that you all advocate for or would like to see or have seen that have had positive effect on the government down the path?
Yeah, for sure. And I know this more from a global context rather than from a state, U.S. state context, but selfishly, and I think a number of other tech companies will probably say the same thing, or at least share some of these things. That is, number one, for Salesforce, when we look to invest into a market, one of the questions that we ask is, does this municipality, state, or federal government have a cloud-first policy? In other words, is there a directive from the very top saying we ought to invest government services into digitizing government and making government smarter? If there is, then there's a possibility for us to have a dialogue, and that's where we go. That's one. It's one indicator, one trigger that I would say, hey, public policy, or public sector team at Salesforce pay attention to what the state of New South Wales is doing in Australia, or Telangana in India, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one. A second one, I think we've probably all heard about this, and that's this problem of like balkanization. And one of the things that we don't want to have to do is to build 2 data centers in every market where we operate, right? And so we fight like tooth and nail against strong initiatives that would require us to host data in country. And so if I had to pick one issue that would make my life easier, give me return a little more sleep to me, and probably make Salesforce even bigger, and some of the other interesting cloud companies would be more seamless and well understood cross-border data flows frameworks across the Pacific, between the Pacific and Europe, and between Europe and the United States. Some of those already exist, and I think we've made some progress with GDPR and some areas. So those are probably our top two of our top 2 policy issues as I think about the Asia Pacific and Latin America. And there's good news and there's bad news, and I can give you a little of both.
Yeah, let's hear the good and the bad.
The good and the bad, let's see. Well, the good is we are starting to see like this. We had a really good conversation yesterday, and we figured out that, for instance, we know his former boss, in some ways my former boss is one and the same person. That's Vivek Kundra, who's the first CIO of the United States under the Obama administration. Do some of you know him? I see a lot of people nodding. So the good news is that we are seeing some like really interesting digital transformation initiatives across the world. And it's not just in the markets that I mentioned. Like digital transformation is happening in Mexico City. It's happening in Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires, by the way, the government did such a good job at the city level that those folks are now sort of the next generation of politicians making it to essentially supersede Macri at the federal level. So it's an example of when you do something well and you pair it up with hopefully a good economic outcome, you'll do well politically, and we're starting to see that elsewhere. And so we're seeing these initiatives. I think what's driving and the genesis of a lot of this, some of it is selfish, a lot of it is a great heart. On the great heart side, I think governments are starting to understand like the constituent is all important. How can we serve him or her better? I think that's the right question to ask. And so they're doing and investing resources and time. They're starting, for instance, to create positions in government like Vivek's former position of CIO, of chief digital officer or chief data officer in government. This was unheard of. Like this didn't exist 10 years ago, but it's starting to really flourish and happen. So I think that's the good news. And by the way, on the other side, the other reason governments are doing this is as they try to compete against each other, right? So Singapore's competing against Hong Kong, and Australia is trying to compete against some others. And so a way in which to attract like incredible talent, more FDI, et cetera, is to say we have good policies in place. We will treat your employees well as citizens. We will treat you as an enterprise correctly and favorably if you come to Sydney, or if you come to Canberra, or if you come to Melbourne. In fact, there's competition between those 2 cities, just like it exists here. So that's on the good side. On the con, or on the bad side, I still see some Louis Draconian data residency requirements coming out all the time. So I'll give you the best example, and this goes back to Brazil. Brazil's central bank probably has the best group of economists that exist anywhere. They're very smart bureaucrats and economists. And yet, like 3 months ago, we saw this directive saying that for any bank looking to outsource data, essentially use cloud computing, it has to reside in country. And the justification is very poor and it's not very strong, and yet it's coming out of the Brazilian central bank. So it sends a chilling effect for any financial institution who's looking to adopt any cool technology, and certainly Salesforce's. And that's like a do or die question for us. So my role then is to find ways in which to push, educate, enable, and in some ways force the Brazilian government to rethink those policies and that vision for the country.
So we are,
I think to put it mildly, we're going to be getting into a highly regulated environment based on what happened with the last presidential election in the United States, and then the recent news with Facebook. Salesforce is just as big a company as those, Google and Twitter and Facebook. You all have a bit of a different play, though, given that customers are, your customers are essentially saying, this is the data that we have, help us make better sense of it, though the regulation could have as negative effect on you as it does those other companies. Yeah. How do you all play a role of kind of the mediator here? And how do you say, listen, data is data no matter what company is using it, and this is how your, the policy and laws that you're trying to pass are going to affect us, this company that has, 17,000 employees globally, all these things. It'd be great to hear, how you all are thinking about what the future, what's coming down the pike.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good question, and I was having this conversation with a couple of you right before this. So I think the best way to answer this question is that Salesforce has really found the way to ingrain 4 core principles into sort of its culture, and it sounds a bit of like a marketing gimmick, but it's not. And I can give you examples of why it's not. Those 4 core principles or values are trust, growth, innovation, and equality. And again, those are sometimes words that you might not hear as the core 4 principles for a very quickly growing company like Salesforce, but they are at Salesforce. And so I can explain what each of those mean and then go into the trust factor. So trust, and that is trust with our employees, with our customers, and then ultimately, I guess, with regulatory bodies, right? And so we're trying to build that trust and explain how it is that we protect our customer data and our customers' data. Second, on the growth side, right, we're trying to ensure that every customer can thrive, and only if they thrive can we thrive. I mean, like, I can't think of a more symbiotic relationship than the relationship that Salesforce has with its customers. Mm-hmm. Like, our business model is predicated on this. If customers stay with us, the waterfall revenue just generates tremendous growth for Salesforce. So we invest 1 out of 4 employees at Salesforce is now dedicated to what we call customers for life. And that's like maintaining a customer for a lifetime. That is the best business model that exists. And then on the innovation side, I mean, this is shared with other cloud computing companies, but we're trying to incorporate as much innovation more quickly as we can. And a lot of this innovation actually comes from customers, including government customers. And so we're constantly having this discussion. What is the latest use case that you have to pay taxes in an intelligent, seamless, quick manner in Sydney? And why don't we learn from that and maybe offer it elsewhere? And so we do a lot of that. We have 3 releases a year. A small a mom and pop shop in like Kansas City will have the same level of innovation and security as Bank of America might, if Bank of America is a customer. And that's a really strong statement to make to a smaller company, right? And then finally, the equality piece, which has been really remarkable. I think Silicon Valley really has a problem around gender diversity, around inclusion of different ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. Salesforce still is struggling with this question, but we've really taken sort of the lead in some ways to try to make sure that this is a core value in everything that we do. And at some other point, I can talk about how we think about this question in other markets, right? Mm-hmm. Which can be really tricky because you have some really tough positions on LGBTQ, for instance, in India or Singapore or elsewhere. So we've had to be really smart about this. Going back to the trust factor, we've been very proactive about certifying under GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Mm-hmm. We were among the first to certify under EU or Privacy Shield between the EU and the United States. And the same goes for corporate binding rules and some other mechanisms to transfer data seamlessly between the European Union or the European Economic Zone and the United States. So we've had to just say, look, this is real. We're going to certify. We're going to be, in fact, on our public website, and I encourage you to look at this, we have a mini workshop for our customers to try to explain how it is that you can build out your own team to comply with GDPR. Because if they're compliant, then they're gonna grow their relationship with Salesforce. So it's almost like we help our customers, or we shepherd them through like really tough regulatory questions so that they're successful, so that they can continue to stay with us.
So question right here.
Interested in your point about international cloud aspect. I work with some offshore providers that scrape U.S. local government websites, and often I find that there's some kind of block that prevents non-U.S. IP addresses from accessing local government websites. Is that something that maybe Salesforce public policy team would be willing to take on?
So question is, for international companies looking to collect data on, local, state, federal websites, some of the, security measures in place, they block the IP. What's the, what would Salesforce think about that, and how would the policy space get inputted?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about that particular question. It's a good one. I would say that, and this I think we're completely on board with, and that is the idea of like this open data movement, right? So I think that, and you can probably speak to this, Andrew. You work with a lot of companies who probably leverage public data, but this idea of making public sector data available to new companies, to entrepreneurs is just like a burgeoning and like really important movement. And in a recent trip to Japan, the Japanese are asking us, what is it that the U.S. government, and how is it that the U.S. government thinks about sort of the open data movement and making public data sets available to the average citizen? So I don't know if you care to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a problem of government's own creation in many ways. The position that myself and the executives that I worked for, when I was in the Obama administration, is kind of, it should be open by default. It's public information, and you need to explain to me why it shouldn't be open. Whether of course, there's like national security reasons going on down, but you need to have a reason for it. The second is, the websites should be mainly for, explaining what the brand or the organization does, and providing some contact information. It shouldn't be essentially the repository for all information about the organization itself. That is, a good API strategy will allow you to, essentially have all of the data that you think might be valuable for customers, and you're selling it if you're a company or you're a government and it's open, to allow for organizations like the ones you might work for to come in and actually leverage that information in a productive way. And so without open data, without APIs, that becomes more difficult. And, I know what the agencies are trying to do. They're trying to prevent, bots from actually taking down their site or doing something malicious, but there might be a positive benefit for you all being able to access that data. And so instead of the government saying, you know what, we're just going to block all of this, they should be saying, okay, what should our API strategy be? What data should we make open? What data should we keep closed? And what reasons do we have, to give to the public as to why that's the case? Question here?
Yeah. Help me understand the software architecture itself for the Australian government, how the Salesforce, the local developed software, and how it works and goes from the architecture.
So the question was, how is the software architecture, function in a local government like New South Wales as it pertains to Salesforce?
Yeah, I mean, the architecture is the same, right? Whether it's Australia, the United States, or just about any market in the world, I'd say that the use case is what varies, and our platform is flexible enough that you can really customize it to whatever the New South Wales government needs. And when I say the New South Wales government, there's 10 agencies, and we started with about 40 licenses, maybe 4 or 5 years, and we now have like up to 10,000 or 15,000. Maybe it's 40,000, I don't know, but it's a large number. It's gone wall to wall. So the folks doing the DMV type activity use it. For instance, the taxation ministry, New South Wales Transport uses it in some really interesting ways. So it's really the use case that changes, not the architecture in this case.
What makes the security work between these two governments? Is it just because the Australia and US is a friendly government, or there is something that makes sure that the information from Australian government's point of view whatever they are doing. But the DMV is a no-go, right? It's a fundamentalistic function. So how does it work? How is the security itself?
So the question was essentially, how do you all make security work in multinational, multi-corporate customers?
Yeah. So every org, so the Australian and the American governments are not communicating along, like every customer has their own instance in this case, right? And so that comes with its own security protocol. So that customer is completely protected and isolated in that sense. Now, I think if you talk about, for instance, federal customers, and you talk about potentially, Department of Defense use cases or intelligence agencies and that sort of thing, which I think in the future may be an opportunity for Salesforce. I think we will have to create individual pods, like data center-like entities, to maintain that data completely separate. But in today's world, we're working off the same architecture.
So this came up quite a bit in sharing amongst federal agencies, because even if it's the United States government, federal agencies don't want to share with one another. There's even a law called computer matching agreements, where you have to essentially set up an agreement between two agencies to share computers. This is back when it was just green screens essentially. But I think systems like Salesforce or Google Cloud or Microsoft 365 are going to better enable the government to communicate with one another between agencies. Data sharing is a little simpler, and then going beyond that, some of the emerging technology that's coming up, better encryption, even stuff like blockchain, is going to allow for more distributed sharing amongst agencies that might be a little bit skittish about that due to their own privacy, their own concerns about national security, whatever it might be. Question here.
I actually worked at State Department on the AID desk, developing public administration systems in developing countries. And then I worked at State Trading Corporation of India on a project, and ended up developing an information system for the State Trading Corporation. So my question to you is, you're aiming at where you're finding the biggest contact with your company with governments. And I'm wondering, do you find that it is in data centers, or do you find it works best in specific programs, specific projects? Where do you find you make the biggest contact, or does it have to be system-wide?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I think it would apply to a bank or it would apply to a university. It applies to a large organization which may be collecting a lot of data, which may have millions of processes, and which requires a platform to bring all of that information together to give the people who are making important decisions about the direction in which that organization is taking a clear understanding of who it is that you're serving. What your goals are as an organization, what tools you actually have to make an impact for whatever your mission statement is. So we serve really large .org nonprofits around the globe. I think we have maybe 35,000 nonprofits who use Salesforce for free, and they range the gamut from very small ones to very large ones. So I think. Again, the delta is not around the organization itself. It's around the use case, which was my same sort of the same answer over here. But happy to talk to you more.
Sorry, we're running out of time, but let's just take a couple of last questions. So full disclosure, I was actually at
yeah. Yeah. I now remember you.
Yeah.
Yes, I was looking. That's okay. Yeah.
So my question for you is the problem that we have at TiE, that I'm curious about when you talk about along the wall, is that a lot of the enterprise clients had multiple orgs as instances, and the ability to communicate inside the org is challenging because they're all set up differently. So when you go into these places, how much of that problem still exists as you go from government to government agency, where you're creating your own instance inside under a bigger license set? Yeah. And because of that, how much of what you're building or the ecosystem you're building is in the app exchange world, where you can all use the same solution to the problem of financial close and everything else, but for government problem?
Yeah.
So can
I think you should answer it because you worked at GSA.
I was going to repeat the question. So how do you as a big software company not replicate the silos of government?
And how do you leverage the things like the app exchange to drive those solutions into the
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not to skirt this question. It's a very good question. Organizations continue to have that problem. So it's not, and I think that problem's about leadership. It's not so much about the technology itself. So the other point I'll say is this: we have a very vibrant community of developers around the world in which we're investing a lot of resources into. And the idea is that the innovation and the creative solutions to problems like these are not going to come from Salesforce. They're going to come from a really large sort of collective intelligence. And this program is called the Trailblazer Program. Mm-hmm. We're trying to make our platform the largest. We're trying to give resources to the average person to be able to develop and manage Salesforce instances around the globe. And I think that's one of the ways. This is sort of a bottoms-up way in which to begin to manage that problem. On to you. Say a word about GSA.
Yeah, so I think, to your point about silos in government and not essentially, there's the problem of some companies arbitraging the government and selling at different prices. There's also just them selling to multiple customers and everybody having a buying choice. I think the government needs to have every government, whether it's state, local, federal, needs to have a microservices strategy. So, the core things that a government should have, both on the back end and the front end, what are those things and how is it provided? And then as you're buying into an organization, leveraging government-wide buying is of course going to be, or strategic sourcing as commercial sector and government sector would call it, that's going to be the most effective way to buy kind of large scale, either civilian wide or DoD wide things that could help with that silo issue. The problem is how do you deal with, and this is something that the government has not been very good at over the last 10 years, how do you avoid building the Frankenstein monster? So every agency has its own unique requirements. How do you not make this kind of crazy, bespoke piece of software that was once just cloud-based, really great off the shelf, you could log into it and it worked, to something that's different in every agency? That takes change management at the cultural level and again, good executive control, which is tough at the federal government level. So
everywhere. Yep.
Yeah. So
one last question.
Very last question. We'll have some time later on if you want to network and
just
continue.
one.
Please.
I worked in Salesforce for 8 years, a lifetime experience. Then became a woman entrepreneur. It's my dream company.
Congrats.
Because Hamid was the most hectic stuff I had. But my question is, as a small business entrepreneur, how do I leverage to work with Salesforce to get into this government projects, or what kind of a role I can do?
To get to government projects. In other words, are you like an integrator or?
Yeah. As you said, microservices, we do microservices for all other customers.
So how can I leverage, as a Salesforce partner, because I'm a Salesforce partner too, how do I leverage that and get government?
So just to summarize the question, and let me kind of bring it up a level, is how does Salesforce support the community of smaller companies that might leverage Salesforce or might be building applications on Salesforce or might be a part of that platform or that platform that you just described, and what are the best kind of strategies to get engaged with the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's my sense, and I don't know a lot about that question, and there's ways in which we can answer it very clearly, and I can connect you with a couple people, but my sense is that we have a set of sort of chosen service integrators, and they tend to be the large sort of Deloittes and other companies, and it's these who are able to support really large deals. So I don't know how it is that we're thinking, and we ought to be thinking about this, to really partner with much smaller entrepreneurial shops like yours. But I'm happy to take that question and find a good answer or a better answer for you.
This is a great transition question. Why don't we move to the panel?
So let's move on. I think let's give both Pablo and Andrew